Welcome to the latest edition of Russia Unmasked from the Center for Russian Studies in Kiev, in which we challenge the propaganda published by the Kremlin against Ukraine and share with you Ukrainian perspectives. My name is Tony Meehan. I'm based in London. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has been going on for more than 1,360 days so far. This week's news items include a piece on President Orban of Hungary, a comment by Ukrainian President's advisor to the head of his office on corruption and the legacy of the Kremlin, Russian propaganda reaches around the world, and how Georgia's former president asks President Zelensky to grant him status as a prisoner of passion against Russia. Latest pieces of Russian propaganda were delivered by Russian chargé d'affaires in Turkey via the Kremlin news agency TASS, and another item through Hungary's Viktor Orban. And also a piece about the former president of Georgia seeking prison protection in Ukraine. Before I refer to the first story, allow me to remind you of the long-standing Russian conditions on peace talks. Firstly, Putin will not meet Zelensky, so obvious blockage there. Russia will only conduct and agree to a peace on its terms, ignoring totally the rights of Ukraine. And in part of those terms is that Ukraine must surrender Donetsk, fire Zelensky, and much, much more, such as not joining NATO, not joining the EU, etc., etc. In its latest propaganda story, the Kremlin-aligned Russian news agency TASS, citing Alexei Ivanov, the Russian chargé d'affaires in Turkey, he claimed that Russia is ready to continue direct negotiations with the Ukrainian side. As far as I'm aware, there have not really been any direct negotiations with the Ukrainian side. The Russian side has repeatedly emphasized, this is quoting Ivanov, that we are ready to continue direct negotiations with the Ukrainian side. Our Turkish partners have also consistently stressed that the Istanbul platform remains available to us. These doors remain open. Very good. Providing Kyiv shows political will, we are ready for such negotiations at any moment. Ivanov noted that the Russian side had presented a number of proposals during the previous rounds of talks. A whole range of initiatives was put forward, including establishing 3 online working groups. Unfortunately, we have not received a positive response to these initiatives from the Ukrainian side. This is subterfuge. Yes, it's propaganda. Ukraine, through its president and various representatives, have responded and rejected many times the Russian proposed peace plans, which I referred to earlier, both directly and indirectly through the offices of both United States and European leaders. If we move on briefly to Viktor Orban, on the other side of the Atlantic, Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, following his meeting with the United States President in an interview with the Hungarian TV channel ATV, he believes that the US President and Vladimir Putin will meet in Budapest, although as yet he is unable to say when. Orban's message for the wider world, courtesy of Vladimir Putin, is that the peace talks stalled over territorial issues, as Russia wants to occupy all of Donetsk Oblast before negotiating peace. Yes, why not? Orban also commented on the Istanbul agreements of 2022, claiming they had been close to success, but the Anglo-Saxons destroyed it. For those of you unfamiliar with the term Anglo-Saxon, allow me to offer 1 or 2 correction points, if not more, on his statement. First of all, the Anglo-Saxons didn't cancel any talks because they were cancelled by the United States president because of Russia's continuous and merciless bombardment of Ukraine's civilian areas, and also due to the high military losses on both sides. The so-called failure of the Istanbul Agreement due to the Anglo-Saxons destroying it, is Russian smoke and mirrors and gaslighting. That's other terms for propaganda. Russia referring to a lost historic group dating back to the Roman invasion in Britain of 43 AD. So, I mean, we're going back almost. For those of you who don't know, the Anglo-Saxons were a Germanic people who emigrated to Britain in the 5th century after the Romans left. Think about that, yes. Based on accurate information from Ukraine, there were no Anglo-Saxons present at the Istanbul meetings. And more importantly, Ukraine has consistently rejected Russian delusional peace plans in which Ukraine surrenders all of Donetsk and other territorial and political demands. A name you will not be familiar with is Mykhailo Podolyak. He is an advisor to the head of the Ukrainian president's office. He has called the exposed corruption scheme in Ukraine's energy sector as a logical echo of the past. I'm sure you're aware a number of investigations, ongoing investigations in Ukraine on the corruption scheme, especially in the energy sector. He says is something to be expected. It is a logical echo of the past in which the Kremlin spent decades building a system to keep Ukraine within its sphere of influence. One of its primary tools was corruption, and the remnants of this mechanism still exist today, as they do in Russia. We'll talk about that later. However, the situation today is fundamentally different. Of course, Russian propaganda will use this as evidence of Ukraine's incompetence. The reality is that the state has not collapsed, but a new institutional framework is being tested. It is rare for countries to identify, investigate, and discuss such cases openly during the war. Think about that. Again, logical and sensible. We are talking the difficult and painful issues and steps towards integrating within the European Union. According to Podolyak, the most significant aspects of the system of independent anti-corruption institutions established after 2014 is working because it's achieving its objectives. It's actually allowing the society in both in Ukraine and also Europe not only to know and understand about the corruption that's going on, but also the steps that are taking to eradicate it. By comparison, corruption in Russia is considered a very serious problem, impacting various aspects of life, including the economy, business, politics, public administration, law enforcement, healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. It hinders economic development, contributes to inequality, and undermines democracy and human rights. Enough said about Russia and its issues with corruption. Let's talk about Russia and its propaganda. Russian propaganda continues to be a challenge for Europe, North America, and other parts of the world. In 2025, Russian propaganda efforts are characterized by the continued use of sophisticated disinformation campaigns to undermine Western support for Ukraine. This is a known fact. It interferes with elections, exploits societal divisions. Key trends include the use of AI, artificial intelligence, chatbots to spread false narratives, a focus on influencing elections in Europe and the United States, and domestic militarization of society. Key factors and tactics in 2025. Artificial intelligence, chatbots exploitation. A November 2025 study by the Institute of Strategic Dialogue showed that major AI chatbots include ChatGPT, Gemini, and Grok sourced Russian propaganda websites for 1 in 5 answers about the war in Ukraine. Yes, that's 1 in 5 answers about the war in Ukraine are coming from Russian chatbots. This increased to the use of Russian sources in response to biased or malicious prompts. And therefore, people's knowledge, 1 in 5 persons' knowledge of what's going on in Ukraine is coming from Russia and Russian chatbots, and therefore influenced by their bias and thinking. Insofar as election interference, Russian disinformation campaigns intensely targeted several Western countries, elections in those countries, Germany, Moldova, United States. Authorities in Germany, think tanks, warned in early 25 about the Russian disinformation and influence campaigns. These are campaigns aimed to manipulate German elections, often including positive coverage for the far-right Alternative for Germany AfD party. In Moldova, pro-Russian disinformation operation known as Matryoshka spreads false claims to discredit Moldova's pro-European government before the 2025 parliamentary elections. In the United States, reports in 2025 described how Russian state media, such as RT, used covert operations and laundered money to pay American influencers. The goal was to spread pro-Kremlin propaganda, exploit domestic divisions, and influence US elections. Here, in short, leaving that alone at this time, an interesting story how propaganda in wartime can get deadly. You will not be aware of I'm assuming most of you will not be aware of the fact that Mikheil Saakashvili, former president of Georgia and former head of the Odessa region administration, has asked President Zelensky to grant him the status of civilian prisoner in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Saakashvili says his appeal to Zelensky was prompted by his recent transfer to hospital from prison, where he claims he was poisoned in March 2022. He's now been transferred back from hospital to prison, and he's now hoping that he can be transferred to a prison in Ukraine where he will be safer. He believes Russia organized the poisoning and that the current Georgian government has openly taken Russia's side. Confirmation again of more propaganda. He argues that it is absolutely clear that his persecution and fate are linked to the war because he was pro-Ukraine. You could say this is where propaganda in war gets deadly. So far, we're still waiting for a response from the office of President Zelensky. Well, that's our news and our chat for today and this edition. From all of us at the Centre, thank you. Please share this podcast with your friends and those you think who will be interested. We'll be back with more news from Kiev soon. Until then, Slavia Ukraini. Ukrainians were, are, and always will be here. Volodymyr Zelensky. Thank you.